One. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host, David Strage, and here in the room I have the Inside Movies Galore crew. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, kids.
So today we're going about to accomplish a discussion on a gigantic movie in the cinematic world called King Kong that was directed by Merian C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack, with a screenplay by James Ashmore Creelman. Let's boil down to it. It's basically a movie producer is looking for a female. He finds one, and they end up going on a mysterious journey to an island that has a gigantic creature, which he then brings back, and it goes on a rampage. So, does that sound right to everyone?
Pretty much. I mean, it's King Kong. Like, I can't conceive, unless you're like a very small child. I don't know how anybody could not know what King Kong is. So that's pretty close.
It's worth clarifying just in case that since there are so many King Kongs out there, I think 3 officially with this title, that this is the 1933 that started it all.
Well, what's interesting is that the idea was conceived by Edgar Wallace, who I believe was behind. Wasn't he behind the Tarzan films? If I remember correctly, Edgar Wallace.
That sounds right, but I don't really know a whole lot about it.
Yeah, well, in any case, why don't we go with first impressions of the film, where everyone first saw it. So, Brandon, I'm going to start with you. What were your thoughts of this film initially, and when was this a first-time watch or no?
This is not a first-time watch. I'm not quite sure when I watched it first time all the way through. This was one of those films that you always see pieces of everywhere. So it's really hard for me to even pinpoint when I watched the whole thing together. But it was one I know. I do remember making a point of it to watch this again. Probably about 10 years ago to make sure that I saw it all the way through. And it just really struck me as something quite amazing for the time. I pictured myself trying to think how people back then would react to it. And I'm sure it would have been with a total amazement.
It would have been brain melting, yeah.
So, Jacob, what was your first thoughts on the film, and was this a first-time watch for you?
Well, this kind of is Brandon touched on. It's almost impossible to pinpoint what the first thoughts on the film were because it's such a huge part of pop culture. I can say this particular one I probably saw for the first time in about '06 or so, because I know I saw the Peter Jackson version and I loved it, and I know I saw that first, and I saw this one after. I've probably not seen it in its entirety since then, but I watched it today to prepare for this, and I also watched a commentary track, so I kind of watched it twice. But in the meantime, there have been multiple times where I've seen bits and pieces because, like you said, it's everywhere, and you see pieces all the time. And there's particular scenes that you see in movies all over the place. There are scenes from this film that are archivally used in a lot of other films.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How about your first impressions of this film from once you first saw it? I know this wasn't the first time watch for you, Dustin.
Yeah, so well, King Kong is one of those things that, everybody knows the name King Kong. It gets mentioned a lot, pretty much everywhere. And so the first King Kong I saw was actually the Peter Jackson King Kong. And even it's surprisingly good, yet still sort of crummy, like video game tie-in. That was kind of my first real encounter with King Kong, aside from Godzilla versus King Kong. But I had never seen the original one that we're talking about today until I think it was spring 2016. I did a project about biological realism in monster movies. And one of the books I was reading for research had a couple chapters on King Kong. And I was like, I've never seen the original one. So I saw it for the first time back then and it was really striking how good it was, because a lot of older movies that have effects like this, the effects don't really hold up, or it's harder to suspend your disbelief because it's like you can really see the rough edges. This was a totally different experience. I mean, yes, the effects are still pretty dated and you can tell, how they did things, but almost all of them still play very well. So I remember being like, wow, this is surprisingly like violent and like convincing. So, I mean, I remember just being really impressed by it the first time I saw it, because I was expecting it to really suck, I mean, yeah, King Kong is like such a beloved classic, but, let's be real, a lot of the older movies, again, don't necessarily hold up that well in terms of effects, but this really did. So I have nothing but fairly high praise for this movie.
Well, King Kong first opened in New York City on March 2nd, 1933. And at the time, it had a lot of rave reviews. It has been ranked on Rotten Tomatoes as one of the greatest horror films of all time.
For sure.
So, my particular, well, I was very much brought up on the Universal monster movies of the classic cinema stage, and this one was amongst one of the ones that I remembered seeing, at least in pieces. But as I became an adult, I was entranced with it, and I probably fully saw it start to finish probably around 1996 or somewhere thereabouts. And I personally love stop motion animation. There were a lot of films that were made with stop motion animation, and Willis O'Brien was the guy who was behind the stop motion animation for this film. And in a sense, he was kind of a pioneer of it before it eventually became more well known with, like, say, the works of Ray Harryhausen, who eventually branched off into his own, franchise of it. But Willis O'Brien had originally first worked on the original Lost World. Which, if anyone's seen that particular film, there's a lot of similar scenes that, like, one of the reasons why I like this film is because not only did it have Kong, but it had all these creatures and things way before, way before they were even able to get the actress back to where they wanted her to be. It had what was it, a plesiosaurus or a brontosaurus?
It was kind of like an apatosaurus thing. It was really weird. So they have quite a few killer dinosaurs in this movie, but most of them are actually herbivores that definitely would not do the stuff that we see them do. Like we see the giant sauropod plant eater like eat this guy, and it's like, what in the hell?
some anger management issues.
So, what do we think about the creatures that they encounter in the forest, guys? Are those what you would consider the dinosaurs of old? Do they, for its time, for what it portrayed, were these dinosaurs pleasant?
I think it was incredibly realistic for the time. I mean, I don't think anybody at the time had seen something like that dinosaur-wise. And of course, maybe not the most knowledgeable about the dinosaurs, but they were all made as kind of antagonists, so to speak.
Well, this was kind of back in the day where spectacle was more important than realism, and that goes to the tribal people they encounter and a whole bunch of exotic locales, that sort of thing. I don't think the accuracy was top of their list, but
I saw the blackface they used on some of the people and that were playing the natives.
Yeah, I didn't notice that myself until this time, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
It's way too white for the for that.
And then I did want to back up a little bit on what Dave said. Actually, I was watching some of the bonus features and whatnot. Willis O'Brien was not just he was pretty much, according to what pretty much everyone, Ray Harryhausen and others themselves, they pretty much credit him for inventing stop motion animation. He was pretty much the guy. So, yeah, this was like earth shattering stuff when it came out.
I mean, they even said that there was a lot of it was the filmmaker was actually kind of based off of the actual director as far as personality and what he did.
Not terribly flattering to the director.
No, not terribly. But if you look at some of the films he did, it makes sense.
Well, Cooper was a sensationalist, right?
The main love is supposedly based off of the co-director, so it was like the two of them were a team, and they were not as much of a team on this movie, but they were both kind of based on the characters.
Yeah,
well, let's
like.
I do want to make a comment with some more comments with the creatures too. So the dinosaurs, as we see them depicted here, are they're kind of like the old. What the fuck? So the dinosaurs we see here are like the old style, like Victorian kind of conception of dinosaurs and like how they're portrayed and like how they look. And a big thing to point out too is like there's a Tyrannosaurus, and it has like the really old body structure where they have it like dragging its tail on the ground. And like, we now know the animal would carry itself completely differently.
Well, not only that, but there was a Stegosaurus, there was a Pteranodon, and of course there was also a snake-like Elasmosaurus, which Kong also comes up against. So there were some interesting creatures that they came along about as they traveled along into the jungle after Kong. But let's back up a bit and talk about the plot. So we have this filmmaker that's evidently known to be like wild, and so evidently he's very not very trustworthy because he's just that mysterious, and that's why he can't find a female actress. So he ends up going out into the streets of New York, and the first lady he comes across, who seems to be pickpocketing some fruit market, he ends up taking her and off and to a ship and says, "Hey, you're going to be my actress."
Yeah.
What do we think about this philanthropist of a director?
huckster is the impression that we get. Because I'm thinking back to like Jack Black's version of the character
I love
in the Jackson one, which is basically just expands on everything that we get from this original.
Right. Yeah, I always liked that character. The way the critics claim that Black was like channeling Orson Welles, and I feel like it was kind of like this character by way of Orson Welles. I would agree with that. But there's a lot of similarities. This guy, he has no scruples. He knows what he wants and he goes after it. And
Yep.
yeah.
So ultimately, he starts filming her on the ship, and of course, there's a captain and a crew. But I feel like they kind of set up some of the, some of the dread ahead of time, because right before the what is it, the movie. There was a guy who evidently was looking for the cast for this director, and right before he was to enter the ship, there was someone who stopped by him and said, "Hey, this ship just seems to be way too big, and the crew just seems to be a little bit too motley to just be a movie crew," or something to that effect. You know what I mean? Do you get a sense that they were setting up some of the stage for us?
I kind of missed that myself, because I think that's one of the things when I first saw this, that it's kind of like, why do they have all this capture gear and stuff on the ship? Like, they are really prepared for this somehow.
I understand where it comes from, because one of the directors, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but he had his, which they based this guy off of a bit, he was all about real life type of movie making. And one of his pioneer films was one that was the first time that he actually had a tiger chase him up a tree in real life. And then, of course, was the first time that a wild tiger ever got that close to the camera. So this guy was known for going on crazy adventures with wild animals and things like that, and that's how they set up the character. So it makes sense why we have stuff there, because of all the weird safaris and stuff.
They both were
Okay.
doing it. They were doing these little docudramas. I think it was Ernest Schoedsack who was operating the camera when that happened. And they actually make reference to that in the movie. I kind of like the part where they're talking to Denham, and he's talking about a rhino charged and his cameraman ran away. And he's like, "So I never trust a cameraman. I do it myself."
Well, and I like the first time he gets Anduro on the ship in front of the camera, and he's telling her to slowly look up, and how he's having her look into the camera. It's just very picturesque how she. At first she's got this short hair, and now she's got this longer hair, and she just looks very pretty while she's being filmed, and evidently so does the crew think so too.
There's the one where he's like, she makes a comment about looking at the pretty side of my face or something, and the guy's like, no, both sides are, Obviously flirting.
Seems fine to me. What do you mean?
So what do we think about Fay Wray as an actress?
Real quick, I did notice one of the things I liked about that scene, that was kind of a bit of foreshadowing, where some of the crew members like talking amongst themselves. It's like, what do they think she's going to be seeing on that island?
Yeah.
They're kind of nervous. So anyway, go on.
Okay. What do we think of Anduro as a character? Do we think that she played her part pretty good?
Yeah, she was great. They don't necessarily give her a whole ton to do, at least from my recollection. So I had a pretty miserable day, and I wasn't able to catch the entire movie, but I have seen it quite a few times over the last couple of years, and I was able to watch a good 2/3 of it before we had to come on. So my memory of her character is just from like the earlier parts of the movie.
Okay.
But
Definitely gets the most to do in the early parts of the film. She does a lot of screaming later.
oh, okay. Well, because they try to give her some characterization, but I think she's a little to me, she comes off as a little thin. Just because a lot of the dialogue I remember from her on the ship is, the crew are like, we don't like having women on the ship, and she's like, oh, well, why not?
Well, I love how the first officer who is falling in love with, or has fallen in love with her, before they even get to the island, he tells her that she loves him, and it's like love at first sight kind of love, kind of thing. I love how short it took him to get to the point where he told her that he loved her, and and I don't know why I love it, but for some reason, that particular scene, to me, it's like people fell a hell of a lot more easily in love back then, didn't they?
At least in the movies.
If love was so easy, then why is it so hard? But what do we think about the character of the young officer?
He's fine. That was Jack, right?
John Driscoll, yeah, I think they called him Jack.
Yeah, that would be him. So
okay, because calling him an officer kind of confused me. Because again, most of my frame of reference for King Kong is the Peter Jackson one. So one of the problems I have really with most movies is kind of telling some characters that look enough alike apart. And so I think I got him kind of confused in my mind a few times. But he's kind of your standard like 30s and 40s like movie hero, isn't he? Like not a whole lot of depth per se.
I get the feeling like the officer is like the kind that is normally in charge of taking care of like the business end of the cargo and the ship, and the captain is just kind of like that background figure that, oh, okay, I lead these guys, and I get the sense that he knows that something's up with the director, they like his particular comment about the island, where he's coming across as the director knows more than he's letting on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, does anyone else have anything else to add?
Well, one thing that I think is kind of cool is that the film does take time. They don't go as deep with Driscoll and a couple of the other characters as I would have liked. I agree that they're a little thinly written, but they do spend time building the characters by the standards of the time for an action-heavy movie. They don't even get to the island until what, 45 minutes into the movie?
It is quite a long build-up, yeah.
Yeah, so they do spend time building up the characters, and they spend more time on Denham than anyone else, but they do, and I like that. I like that approach. It does make it more effective once you get into the action-y part. And just one other little random comment on character. I love how the credits actually list King Kong as playing the eighth wonder of the world.
I totally missed that. That's awesome.
I love that too. I love that too. Moving on to okay, so the ship is obviously going somewhere, and as they approach, it's got like this heavy fog, and that's about the time where they start mentioning that this island is shaped like a skull. So I like the fact that that the island it has the shape of this skull. What about you guys?
Well,
Little on the nose.
I mean, it's kind of I mean, I don't know. There's something kind of straightforward about a skull island. I mean, or anything skull shaped. I mean, shoot, I love the Goonies, and they like that skull imagery very well in that. So it's the easiest way in the world to say, "Hey, danger."
It's like Snake Island or something,
or death lies ahead, or something like that. So,
turn back now.
I'd turn back if I were you. Wizard of Oz. Anyways,
or it's like that. It's like that Simpsons where they're going down the river in Africa and they come to the fork and they look down like the one way and it's just like a brightly lit jungle with like a rainbow. They look down the other way and it's just like gray clouds and animal bones next to withered trees. And it's like,
Alrighty. So ultimately they get to this island and they start hearing like these words that the natives are saying. What do we think of the natives once they get to the island?
Highly racist and culturally inappropriate.
Very much
racist towards us, or us?
What do you mean towards us?
Yeah, this is of course. I mean, this is one of those things that doesn't hold up very well to current culture. But it's just like anything else. It's just like having that supposedly Asian character.
That was not great.
They loved, but again, that's at the time, and it's just all the stereotypes. I mean, the fact that they had some of them in blackface, for goodness sakes. It's just, but as Jacob had said earlier, it was that presentation of the exotic, taking people to a place they've never been. So, I mean, I could say that there's ignorance. It's all chalked up to ignorance at the beginning.
I found it a little cringy that this is supposed to take place in the Eastern Indian Ocean, but it looked like they were going for an African vibe, and it was kind of like. Apparently, the language they used did include a little bit of Malay, but it was mostly like gibberish. But apparently, the language was closer to, Indochina than it could have been.
Okay, so ultimately, with the interpretation of the captain, which obviously the captain knows the language a little bit, and they realize that they are unwanted from this supposed ceremony that they find out is this bride to this guy that they call Kong, which is apparently their god. What do we think about that concept?
That made me think of. I was kind of surprised that the crew didn't. I'd have thought they would have maybe attacked the crew for that, because it reminds me of that scene reminds me of Dances with Wolves, when like he interrupts like the buffalo ceremony to be like, "Hey guys, the buffalo are here," and he like totally interrupts the dance, and basically like 6 guys just like jump on him and start beating his ass. And it's like, you ruined the ceremony. Like I would have thought that they would have been given a similar treatment from that, but the natives were just kind of like, "Oh, who are you?" So that was a little weird to me, but.
And then, of course, it took the native witch doctor, which apparently that's what he was. The native witch doctor suddenly noticed that this golden-haired beauty over here. Let's. I'll trade you 6 of our women for her. What do you think of that?
I think
That's
that
weird.
goes along with the whole savages type deal, and that really I think is just a play into that role of these are just uncivilized savages and backwards. With the "I'll trade you my wives for this,"
Okay.
and I don't know, just
One thing I liked is the director just kind of turned around, slid his hat down, and just kind of slowly sauntered away. For some reason, it's like the hat tipping was a thing back then with the brims.
Yeah, it was kind of. I was thinking, well, that's kind of disrespectful.
So ultimately, after they returned to the boat, that's when another boat, unsuspecting, snuck up to the boat and stole Miss and Darrow back to the island for their continuation of their ceremony. And so, what do we think about what happened next?
You mean when after they get Anne, or when the crew launches their rescue mission?
When the crew launches their rescue mission.
Oh, hell breaks loose.
Pretty much, yeah. So, and it seemed like, okay, we'll just take our guns and, go get her back. And I don't remember there being a whole lot of a battle, like more like, it's like, look at what we've got, blam. And everybody's like, ah! So that was my memory of that, at least.
Okay, and that's when they took their stroll into the jungle after. And one thing I noticed is that when they took her back to the island, they took her dress and all. They didn't even like throw on their own dressing ceremony as they did in the '76 version. They just took her dragging and screaming. But there was one thing I noticed is that the post that they took her to was all in stone. I like how so much detail was put into to this this place where they actually put her hands into. It was stone carved. It was stone carved totems, in fact.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch, because I remembered them just being like wooden posts in some of the other versions I'd seen. I had seen the '70s Dino De Laurentiis Kong, but it had been quite a while. I'm actually more familiar with the sequel to that movie than I am with the actual Kong remake, the Son of Kong. But
actually, King Kong Lives was the sequel.
That was King Kong Lives? Okay. I knew there was... I couldn't remember the title.
King Kong was sequel to this one.
Okay. Maybe I'm getting them... I think I'm getting them confused, because I have seen King Kong Lives, and I really like King Kong Lives. I just don't remember the remake that King Kong Lives is a sequel to. All that in too much detail.
So moving on. So they end up going through the jungle, fighting some of these creatures off. And one of the things I've always seen in every single version of Kong is they come across this log that's in the middle of a ravine.
And King Kong pitches them into this pit, and I don't remember the full story. I'm assuming either Jake or Brandon knows it more. The lost spider pit scene in the original, which they resurrected in the Peter Jackson movie, and they were even able to. So the DVD of King Kong I have, they were able to like find it and kind of put it back in, but I don't quite remember detail on that. So take it away, guys.
Well, my understanding was that the original cut got a negative reaction from test screening. Apparently, they thought the spider was silly or something like that. So they took it out. And one of the cool bonus features on the DVD I had, which I watched today, is Peter Jackson and the folks at Weta recreated the scene using the 1930s technology. And that was kind of a fun little featurette, but it really gives you an appreciation for how they built the film. But I have not actually seen the official, and I don't. My version doesn't have it inserted.
Yeah, and I think my version's the exact same as yours. But yeah, well, it is what it is with those scenes. Sometimes they have to cut them for those various reasons, like silly looking, which is kind of strange considering the technology back then.
What do we think about the layout of the island? Do we like the way it looks?
The island is pretty nice. I mean, like, did they shoot? How much of this was any of this on location? Because it looks on location, even though there are some moments where it's like, oh, that's a soundstage.
I think the only location shots were in New York City.
Yeah.
Wow. So, like, it's really convincing then.
Oh yeah. It was definitely convincing. At least the stage, the sound. I personally like the stop motion animation of every single creature. I mean, to me, it kind of reminds me of like seeing like films like the giant Gila monster or things of that nature. I mean, I believe
the giant Gila monster wasn't stop motion. That was literally just this poor lizard that they got wandering around miniatures.
That was a real one.
Yeah, well, still, it kind of reminds me of that era of filmmaking. Even though I know that was like cheap era of filmmaking, it still reminds me of that of films in that ilk. So
it's just kind of funny that we were watching the Gravity Falls episode that dealt with the claymation animation. Turns out that no, that would be too hard. You think we actually sat there and stop animated the entire thing? No, I just used black magic to make them real.
That was so good. Like, wow, this battle looks really expensive. Like, yeah, good thing we're seeing it from this angle.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is pricey because it's like, what is it? Something like I can't remember what they gave the illustration of, something like a minute of live action footage. If you were filming normally, would take a minute to do, but I think they said it was something like 144 minutes to do a minute of stop motion, something along those lines.
Yeah, it just took so long to do anything in the film, but that just shows you what kind of dedication it takes with that sort of thing. I mean, the model. I mean, they had those skeletal frame models of Kong and the other. Like, there's only one remaining, which was kind of cool to see that in the animation. The one remaining, one left. You could see that. But they used rabbit fur.
Were there any other characters that we wanted to touch on before we talked about King Kong himself?
You know, they were mostly fairly thin. So
Okay.
I mean, the mostly like the creatures on Skull Island, like they don't seem to have a whole lot of personality, but they're still believable-ish. You know, like at least they don't act like the animals actually would have acted, but they act like characters, I guess. So
Well,
I just want to give an additional shout out to the Skull Island monsters.
I'm glad there wasn't just Kong on the island. That's the thing. I liked that there were other creatures. In fact, it seemed like there were 3 creatures that he killed to protect Anne's character before she was rescued to go back and obviously the director had actually taken Kong back with them. But
Right.
What do we think of Kong himself?
Surprisingly complex.
Yeah.
I like that he had kind of a mohawk going, sort of. For some reason, I kept thinking, going back, are they blowing air in his hair or something?
It's interesting how they made him a very sympathetic character, especially towards the end. I didn't feel as much sympathy for him this time as I have in the past. I think it was that whole destroying the village and eating people and killing them scene that they had when he got PO'd.
Are you talking about the native that he had in his mouth?
There were like multiple natives. He killed lots of natives in that scene.
Yeah, that was kind of messed up. It's like, wait, wow. Although that does remind me of I don't know if anybody's ever seen. There's a Robot Chicken joke they did about King Kong, where it's like some explorer like shows up on the island, and he's just like asking the chief or whoever it is like questions. It's like, so wait a minute, so what's with he basically just pokes like a bunch of holes like in it's like, how is this wall supposed to work? Why do you have that door? And like as he's talking, like King Kong is like walking by the door, and King Kong kind of like stops and is like, huh? And like puts his ear to the wall and like starts listening to the guy. And the dude's like, why do you have a door big enough for King Kong to go through if the point is to keep him out? So besides, he's just like a giant gorilla. Like, can't he just climb the wall? And furthermore, there would have to be more than one King Kong, right? I mean, there has to be a sizable population to sustain itself. And King Kong is like outside the window, like, King Kong is like listening, like he's never thought of this before. And then in that episode, like it cuts away from that, and then like it cuts back to it later, and the explorer guy is still pointing, is just standing there like going like, furthermore, and there are giant apes just pouring over the wall and like trashing the village. And the witch doctor is like, stop saying stuff.
I always wondered why they had a door big enough for Kong to get through. That still baffles me.
Well, they even made a comment in Jurassic Park. What do they got in there? King Kong?
Right. Yeah.
So
I see that he comes across as like they did a really good job with the facial expressions on Kong. And it did give him sort of a feel of being kind of human and kind of like not just a monster. And I agree that in this version you can only get but so much sympathy. I know the Peter Jackson version played up the sympathy factor quite a bit. He was very protective of Anne in that one. But this one, yeah, there's still some sympathy available.
Oh, there's that line, the famous line at the end, 'twas beauty that killed the beast.
Yeah.
There's some parody version of that. I can't remember what movie this particular one appears in, but somebody says that, and somebody like next to him is like, what are you talking about? No, it didn't.
Well, when they bring Kong back to, what is it, New York City, because the ending scene is definitely at the Empire State Building. So what they do is they chain him up on this theater, and it looks like they've got like these long lines of audiences, even though you only see like just the middle audience. But you get a sense that like they're in a big auditorium of some sort.
Well, they're on Broadway, right?
Yeah, something like that. Well, ultimately, when Kong roars, he sounds like a lion, doesn't he?
Yes.
Is that what they used?
Yeah, I think so.
Apparently, they created his voice by combining a lion and a tiger's roar. and I think it was like they played the lion forward and the tiger backward, and I don't know, gave it a weird sound.
Yeah, it still sounded more like a lion to me. What about anyone else? Did they enjoy that scene when he broke from his chains?
It's like, let's tie him up and piss him off. Nothing could go wrong there.
Well, expected after what they were doing.
What do we think about those recorders and how ancient their recording devices were?
Well, it wasn't ancient at the time.
Well, no, it wasn't. But shit, those cameras, man, those were like huge.
Like you had to throw away the flashbulb after every picture.
Yeah. Use it once and then throw it on the floor, stamp on it. But ultimately, when he is let loose on the city, what do we think about the city of New York?
Well, I don't remember him actually doing all that much damage. He's just kind of like wanders around. It's like, where'd Anne go? Oh, and like I think he does kill a few people though, right? Like, doesn't he see somebody who looks kind of like Anne? He's just like, oh, and he just like tosses her away.
Yeah,
actually,
that bothered me.
There was one scene in that had some pretty significant destruction, and apparently it was Merian C. Cooper had a scene he wanted to make, and he kind of came up with a sneaky way of justifying it, and that was the scene with the train. Because apparently the film was originally 13 reels, and he said, no, definitely not 13. We want 14. So they filmed another scene, and then ended up cutting the film down to 11 anyway. But I read that apparently Cooper grew up with one of those trains going overhead, and so this was like a way for him to get revenge on the whole idea.
He just has a fuck trains moment in there because he didn't like trains.
I mean, technically, it was of course, the Empire State Building is where it's all at when it comes to the New York scene. And even then, they said that I think it was Cooper that had gotten part of the inspiration when they were building the Empire State, that this is what I'm finally looking for, to have something here in New York, something this massive.
Oh yeah,
right.
And it was a feat. Back then, it was the tallest building. I think it was the tallest building in the world back then. So yeah.
Yep. In fact, I remember them using the Empire State Building and James and the Giant Peach as well. But ultimately, what do we think of that end scene with the Empire State Building? Now that we're talking about it,
well, it's so classic. I mean, what can we even say about it to do it justice?
Apparently, that image, like the image of Kong on this building with the planes around him, was kind of the genesis of the film in the first place. But another fun example of apparently Cooper really was a character. Apparently, he said, "We created the monster, so we're going to shoot the bastard down," or something like that. Cooper and Schoedsack are the pilots of the plane that shoots him down.
okay.
I did not notice that before.
You know,
good Lord, what's wrong with me?
Interesting. So apparently Kong climbs up the Empire State Building with Anne, who is his favorite Barbie doll, bringing her up to the top, and gets shot down in that iconic moment. So at this moment, I'm going to ask you guys about the special effects of the entire film. Even though we touched on it a bit, what do we think of the special effects of the film entirely?
They're really great.
Yeah, They're just, I mean, there's so many techniques, and Cooper himself was a pioneer of a lot of techniques that were used back then and even today in some aspects. I mean, where you had, I mean, just small things like when you had Kong sitting there and with Fay Ray in the background, and they did that by using a projector to project her image into the background. I mean, that's just amazing and innovative work that not many people have, and actually nobody had seen back then. It's just some really cool things.
Definitely, in terms of the visual effects, this film it was definitely ahead of its time, and it took some very, again, O'Brien did some really awesome work, and some of the other stuff too. Murray Spivak on the sound department, the sound effects and editing, and he apparently worked closely with the composer Max Steiner, and the two of them, the sound of the film was pretty much. For its time, it started a lot, and Steiner also is credited with pretty much starting the practice of orchestral scores for movies. Because between this and I think he had a film that came out the year before, are considered like the first orchestral scores in film. So that was pretty big too. All around, this was like a kind of a what
Groundbreaking film for films to come. Wouldn't you say?
was that?
Groundbreaking film for films to come.
Definitely.
So,
I don't know if this is absolutely accurate, but I think it's pretty close. We made reference a few times to Peter Jackson doing the remake. He is well known as a huge fan of the film. But in the bonus features I was reading, he said something that I think I agree with, that he thinks more people were inspired to get into filmmaking by this movie than probably any other film. That's a pretty lofty claim, but it might be true.
That's probably true. Yeah.
I would have to say I would have to agree because there was a lot of ground covered in making films. I mean, they showed how an actress was to act on the ship when he was telling her to slowly raise your eyes, and that to have her naturally act, to eventually get to the point of being fearful and screaming. That is exactly how you make a scream queen.
Well, I think it was probably the first time that you had gotten to see it's like, oh, so that's what a director does, like in like any kind of mainstream, like widely seen kind of thing. And so I think people saw that and are like, oh, that's what you do? Okay, I can probably do that. Yeah. Like, that might be fun.
Not to mention some of the people who were directly inspired, who themselves went on. Ray Harryhausen was one of the people who saw this as a teen, and obviously he went on to be huge in cinema and what have you. It was interesting hearing him talk, though. The dude sounds exactly like Alan Arkin. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, I agree. Was there anything else that we wanted to touch on before we moved on?
I'm trying to think of something we didn't cover.
Well, one random thing. This is just a completely random thing, but I thought it was really cool and really weird. But we talked before about how Carl Denham is largely based on Merian C. Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
And he's played, of course, by Robert Armstrong. I don't recall offhand which one went first, but the two of them died less than a day apart from each other. So that's just kind of crazy that he plays a fictionalized version of the other one and they died at the same time.
Very interesting.
That is weird.
No, I mean the only other thing I thought was odd. I mean, I was talking a little bit about cultural and cultural differences and such, and one of the other things I thought about was just the kind of treatment of women in the movie. Basically, women can't come on these journeys; they can't take it. Things like that. It's going to be interesting as you go through time, as time evolves, that you will actually have plenty of people who will have no understanding as to the whole concept or even the culture that would work with that.
Well, that probably also plays into centuries of nautical superstition. Never have a woman on the boat kind of thing.
So The Simpsons did their King Kong parody quite a few Treehouse of Horrors ago, and we get a Smithers joke out of that.
What's
Do you guys remember? You guys probably don't remember. Oh my god!
I don't remember it.
So somebody makes a comment. It's like, I'm trying to remember the exact order that this is set in, but Smithers basically says, I think women and seamen don't mix. And Mr. Burns is like, we know what you think. Jeez.
What's interesting is that I was just reading some background around while you guys were talking. Evidently, Cooper had taken his concept of King Kong to Paramount Studios in the first years of the Great Depression. And but the big head honchos had wanted nothing to do with the project because it was going to cost them dearly to have shoots in Africa and stuff like that. So ultimately, RKO with him, they started developing the movie The Most Dangerous Game, and they hired Ernest B. Schoedsack to direct that feature. Well, at the time, they had actually assembled this jungle stage set to be built with Robert Armstrong and Fay Wray as the stars on a project called Creation, which also was a stop-motion animation by Willis O'Brien and about a group of travelers shipwrecked on an island of dinosaurs.
Yeah, I meant to mention Creation because that was something I watched too. They actually, one of the reasons why there were dinosaurs on Skull Island in the first place is because O'Brien had done all this work for a film that died. It was going nowhere. And Cooper took that and incorporated it into the film. And so he was able to save all this work and put it to productive use. So that was kind of cool. And yeah, I forgot to mention that they concurrently did this with The Most Dangerous Game. Apparently Cooper claimed that he had Fay Wray working for him 24 hours a day because she would do one during the day and then one at night. And it's like, but they saved on production cost.
Most definitely. So,
weird random thing. This is really cool. The legend of the Loch Ness Monster goes way back before this film, but apparently that famous image surfaced in 1933, and a lot of people blame this movie for it.
That's probably true because I used to be really into like the Loch Ness Monster, like as a thing in elementary school, and I can see that easily being a part of that whole story because, I mean, the Legends of the Loch Ness Monster went back to I think like the 1600s or something, like Saint Columbus, or Christopher. I can't remember exactly which one saint. His name started with a C. But it didn't really take off until like the 30s. And, thinking it over now, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, oh yeah, King Kong. It's like, oh yeah, look, we got the picture of it, like the fake surgeon's photo. And it does indeed look a lot like something that would have been inspired by the creatures in King Kong. So I can totally buy that.
So apparently, Fay Wray was not the only actress that was considered Other actresses that were considered were Dorothy Jordan, Jean Harlow, and Ginger Rogers were also considered for the role before they chose her. And apparently, Fay Ray recounts that Cooper had actually told her he planned to star her opposite the tallest, darkest leading man in Hollywood.
Well, he didn't lie.
She assumed that meant Clark Gable until he showed her a picture of Kong climbing Empire State Building.
It's like, oh, well, shit.
Interesting.
Show me the lie.
So, in any case, did anyone else have anything else to add before?
You know, this is a legit. If you don't like older movies, give this one a chance because it is pretty legit, and I would be surprised if you didn't enjoy it if you're like a monster movie fan or like a film history fan. So, you know, give it a shot, you know.
Oh yeah, I would agree. I love this film for the simple fact that not only was the island about Kong, it had more dangers along the way. I mean, more creatures and effects than you would probably be able to imagine. I mean, what set does not include stone-like sculptures in their, elaborate
in their jungle now?
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I can't believe we didn't touch on this before. Like the battle scene where Kong like fights a Tyrannosaurus for Anne.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that was probably, I don't think there had ever been anything like that like attempted before, and like how they were able to kind of merge like the stop motion with the live action.
I agree.
That. Oh, it was just so well done and so cool. And like the way that they did it, I can mostly believe that it's a fight between real animals too. Like they really knocked it out of the park on that one.
I have to agree.
Or at the very least, how animals like that would fight.
Right.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, most definitely.
An impressive.
Alrighty.
King Kong was an impressive and record-breaking film in many ways. I think that without King Kong, we probably would we would not have some of the amazing advances in film today.
Alrighty. On that note, I think we would close out this discussion. So, Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm a horror collector and bio student here in Milwaukee. I show off my horror collection at my Instagram, DHRHunter, all one word. I also have a channel that I've started somewhat recently for showing off the things I pick up as they kind of come in. I'm the Crypt of Horrors here on YouTube. I also hang out a lot on Twitter, also under the Crypt of Horrors. So go find and interact with me on there. I'm also on Pop Culture Weekly here on YouTube. And my friends with that are putting on the Twisted Dreams Horror Film Festival here in Milwaukee the weekend. Actually, next weekend, the 4th through the 7th. So go check it out. We got Joe Bob Briggs, and we're almost out of tickets. So go buy a ticket. Do it.
Alrighty. Going over to Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh yes, I play a Septum Sen on Septum Sen versus the World, which is a YouTube channel dedicated to physical media, the collection of physical media, and hopefully preservation of physical media. And we do various things on the channel, such as reviews, release information, and just pickup videos. We have some interesting projects upcoming, and definitely worth looking forward to.
Alrighty. Going over to Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. Well, I am also a movie fan and collector and what have you. Frequently guest on Septum Sin versus the World, where, like you said, we do a assortment of videos. I'm currently working on editing another film in my Criterion Review collection, series, I should say. And hopefully, that'll come out very soon. I do have my own channel as well, Kotobuki Jake, that's focused more on nature and the natural world. And just and I come on into Movies Galore and have a good time just chatting movies and just loving cinema.
Alrighty. And my name is David Stragi. I have been the host for this evening, but as you well know, most of us do every once in a while get a chance to host this merry band of films that we have been discussing for Monster March. And hopefully you've enjoyed us along this journey. As for next month, we will be discussing animals in film.
With Lake Placid being our first up.
And definitely check out some of my other reviews on said channel. I will be putting them out on a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur. So definitely check those out once I get back on a roll and to do those. And thank you so much for listening, folks. Just don't go ape shit without us. Everyone say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Like, share, and subscribe.